This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On April the 30th, we hosted our annual Defense and Security Studies Conference on Threats to Global Security under Trump 2.0, featuring expert speakers on Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and managing Canada-US relations in the second Trump era. For reasons of security, our speaker on Iran was not recorded for this series.
Good afternoon, and it's my privilege to kick us off with the third superpower that we're considering as our threat, North Korea. And we're privileged to have James Trottier here to talk with us on this. He's got kind of a unique set of experiences and credentials serving in Korea and in Asia, and having led various missions into North Korea. We're looking forward to hearing your insights, James. Thank you for coming this far, and welcome to our podium.
Yes, thank you for the invitation to today's conference. So I just came back to Canada after spending the winter in Asia, and Donald Trump is losing the room in Asia. Countries in the region are variously incredulous, alarmed, and outraged, or all three. Most of all, they are confused by the U.S. superpower behaving in such an erratic way, not only on tariffs, but as I mentioned this morning in my question, on the silencing of the Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Liberty. Self-sabotage actions that undermine America's own stature and influence. Most troubling is Trump's unwillingness and inability to distinguish between friends and foes, with friends liable to be treated as severely or worse than foes, especially if the foes are strong and the friends are not. And tapping into the Asian zeitgeist is a mocking Chinese social media video likening Trump to North Korean founding father Kim Il-sung, and showing Trump admiring a portrait of himself accompanied by the North Korean song, "The Whole World Envies Us." So perhaps one of the events you may have overlooked in 2025 is the resumption of the Pyongyang Marathon after several years interruption, starting from the COVID pandemic in 2020. The marathon draws participants from several countries, including Western ones, and is one of the many anomalies about North Korea that I saw while leading several Canadian diplomatic missions to North Korea during both the Harper and Trudeau administrations. As the head of political and economic affairs at the Canadian Embassy in Seoul and the diplomatic liaison to US-UN forces in Korea, and simultaneously accredited to North Korea, I had the unique experience on occasion of being on the principal US base in South Korea, ground zero for a North Korea attack on South Korea on a sunny Saturday, and then being on the following equally sunny Monday in Pyongyang, North Korea, ground zero for an attack on North Korea. So this brings home the perpetual risk and carnage, potential carnage on the Korean Peninsula. As for the Pyongyang Marathon, it illustrates that North Korea is not as isolated as most people assume, even so now with its Russian alliance. Because since the collapse of the Trump-Kim Hanoi summit in 2019, there is a new man in Kim Jong-un's town, namely Vladimir Putin, and a new and mutually beneficial relationship between him and Kim Jong-un. In June 2024, Kim Jong-un and Putin signed a mutual defense treaty. It's hard to overstate the significance of the assistance that Kim has provided the Russians and the economic and security benefits he has received in return. North Korean artillery shells, missiles, rockets, and soldiers have proved invaluable to the Russian war effort against Ukraine, giving Russia a significant battlefield advantage over Ukraine. North Korea has provided Russia with more than 20,000 containers of armaments, including artillery guns, millions of artillery shells, short-range ballistic missiles, multiple rocket launchers, and anti-tank weapons. It has also provided 14,000 North Korean soldiers, including military engineers, to support launches of North Korean KN-23 missiles. Reportedly, some of the artillery shells initially malfunctioned, but their reliability has steadily increased and caused much havoc and death to Ukrainians. In early 2024, the Supreme Commander of NATO said that Ukraine was being outgunned 10-1. Much of that was due to North Korean artillery shells. North Korean soldiers have suffered heavy casualties, particularly in the early stages of their deployment. 14,000 troops sent 4,700 casualties, according to South Korean intelligence, including 600 dead. And reports from the front lines indicate that they have learned from their mistakes and have grown steadily more effective and have gained proficiency with advanced weapons, including drones. So the Russians pay for this assistance in cash and in kind, including refined oil, food, humanitarian assistance, and reportedly anti-aircraft missiles. Most troubling is that the Russians may have provided various forms of technical expertise, including probably for the North Korean reconnaissance satellite program, drone prototypes, electronic warfare equipment, and advanced SA-22 surface-to-air missile systems, and possibly for North Korea's nuclear-powered submarine program, its missile program, including launch technology, and potentially for its nuclear command and control capabilities. North Korean soldiers have gained very valuable battlefield experience, and North Korea has been able to test its weapons under battlefield conditions. The battlefield experience of North Korean soldiers and weapons, combined with Russian technical assistance, may change the threat matrix on the Korean Peninsula and risks upsetting the strategic balance on the peninsula. The alliance with Russia has also provided Kim with intangible benefits: the experience of being a valued ally with something in other state values, the acquisition of a counterweight to the influence of China. A key question is whether this alliance endures beyond the end of the war. There are two schools of thoughts on this, on its durability. The first school believes that the relationship is purely transactional, and that when the Ukraine-Russian conflict ends, Putin will no longer need Kim's munitions and his soldiers, and the situation will revert to the status quo ante bellum, with Russian influence and impact fading in comparison to China. The second school believes that the relationship is so fundamental and mutually beneficial that it will endure. So only time will tell, but the relationship between Putin and Kim seems to have gone beyond being purely transactional. Whatever the original intent, something fundamental seems to have shifted in their alliance and is seen to have value for both sides. The fact that the two principals are making new agreements and preparing for a possible visit to Russia by Kim suggests that the relationship is being institutionalized, formalized, and will endure in some fashion. In fact, just this past weekend, on April 26th, Russia, for the first time, officially acknowledged North Korea's involvement in the war, and North Korea replied in kind and acknowledged their involvement on this past Monday, so 2 days ago. So beyond the Ukraine conflict, Putin may envisage other situations where North Korean munitions and soldiers may be important, not least of all to put his neighbors and the West generally on edge and off balance. Kim can certainly use the payments he receives from Russia. Beyond that, the Russian alliance gives Kim one more card to play vis-a-vis both China and the USA. Donald Trump is fond of telling foreign leaders that they have no cards to play, that he holds all the cards. With the Russian alliance, there's a new game, and Kim has another card to play. So what of the US-North Korean relationship? Should we expect to see a revival of the Trump-Kim bromance? And more importantly, will it lead to the agreement which eluded the leaders during Trump 1.0? Since the collapse of the 2019 Hanoi summit, US-North Korean relations have been in abeyance, characterized by recrimination and saber-rattling. For the Biden administration, North Korea was clearly a second or third tier issue, overshadowed by the war in Ukraine, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Middle East, Iran, and the pandemic. When the Biden administration did focus on the region, it was to strengthen the security architecture and security alliances bilaterally and trilaterally with South Korea, and Japan, with Australia and the UK under AUKUS, with India, Japan, and Australia under the Quad, and so on. While much of the security architecture was actually focused on China, North Korea regarded some of it, particularly the trilateral alliance between US, Japan, and South Korea, as a hostile act aimed at itself. The two sides were frozen in their positions. The Biden administration claimed to have no preconditions for talks with North Korea, but at the same time insisted that any talks must include a North Korean commitment to denuclearization. For the North Koreans, denuclearization was and is a non-starter. There was a general consensus among experts on North Korea, including in US military, intelligence, and diplomatic communities, that North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons, and by extension, its missiles. But there was no certainty that North Korea would have been a willing partner to talks, even if the Biden administration had been more forthcoming. The North Korean leadership felt embittered and embarrassed by the failure of the Hanoi summit. Principal officials involved in that summit suffered imprisonment or worse as punishment. Plus, for much of the Biden years, North Korea was locked into self-imposed isolation as a result of the pandemic, even from China. So into this vacuum now stepped Vladimir Putin with an offer that Kim welcomed, and the results have exceeded the expectations of both of them. And over the intervening years, Trump has spoken fondly of Kim and famously kept his letters among the purloined documents in Mar-a-Lago. He also referred to North Korea twice as a nuclear state in January 2025. He was the first US president to have done so. And of course, Trump famously likes to make deals and would like to reach an historic agreement with North Korea, something none of his predecessors had done. He would be part of a trifecta of deals he envisages, together with agreements on the Russian-Ukraine war, the Middle East, possibly Iran, deals which he imagines will gain him the Nobel Prize. There is no guarantee that Kim is interested in renewed dialogue with the US. North Korea has gotten stronger, not weaker. It has enhanced its missile and nuclear capability. Its alliance with Russia has given it an enhanced position in regional and global geopolitics. It's also demonstrated great internal resilience in the face of the shutdown of its trade and borders due to COVID. It feels emboldened. The US would have to persuade Kim to come to the negotiating table by offering incentives to North Korea, such as easing of sanctions, removing North Korea from the state sponsor of terrorism list, and opening of liaison offices. Kim wants sanctions lifted, but not at any price. He is also well aware of Trump's interest in the deal. That strengthens Kim's hand. In Hanoi, the price was too high for both parties. In Hanoi, the US would not agree to lifting of sanctions without a commitment to close all North Korean nuclear facilities. And North Korea was only willing to close one site in return for easing of sanctions. Trump held the line in Hanoi, in large part due to his then National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who worried that Trump would give away the shop to Kim. Kim today would certainly not be willing to agree to denuclearization any more than he was willing to do so in Hanoi. The question is, what price would Trump be willing to pay for an agreement with Kim without John Bolton to hold him back? Mike Waltz, Trump's current National Security Advisor, is fighting for his political survival and does not have the stature of John Bolton or Bolton's predecessor, H.R. McMaster, nor any expertise on North Korea. And Waltz's National Security Council staff has been decimated by MAGA ideologues who accuse NSC staff of disloyalty to Trump. The State Department has also been significantly weakened. One might anticipate that Trump may use as a template for talks with North Korea the U.S. talks with Russia, Iran, and the Middle East, and on the Middle East, where Trump is dependent on a friend, a New York realtor with no diplomatic experience, a man who is out of his depth and has been thoroughly played and outplayed by Vladimir Putin, the veteran and wily former KGB officer. So ideally, talks between North Korea and the U.S. should encompass a range of issues beyond denuclearization. The U.S. should press North Korea to agree to freeze production of nuclear warheads, halt production of plutonium and enriched uranium, allow site visits by the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, begin discussions on arms control and arms limitations in return for lifting and easing of sanctions and other incentives. So that would require time, preparation, and involvement, and negotiations by experts at working level, laying the groundwork for a meeting of leaders. It is the failure to do the preparatory work that led to the collapse of the Hanoi summit. But that's not Trump's style. That's not his modus operandi. And experts are held in low regard by his administration. So according to current and former advisors of Trump, quote, he has shown little patience for the nuts and bolts of negotiations, dipping in and out of negotiations and largely leaving aides to work out the details. So Trump is all about the quick fix and the media moment, the announcement of success. A case in point is the example of the dozens of trade deals Trump claims to be currently negotiating. In an interview with Time magazine this last weekend, Trump claimed to be negotiating 200 trade agreements, which is more than the 193 member states of the UN, so rather odd. Plus, he says talks are underway with China, which of course China denies. So trade deals are very complex and rife with domestic and foreign complications. At the Canadian Embassy in Seoul, I led ultimately successful efforts to obtain South Korean ratification of the Canada-South Korean Free Trade Agreement in 2014. Negotiation of this agreement took several years. According to a recent study, on average, trade deals signed by the U.S. took 18 months to negotiate and 45 months to implement. Yet Trump's team claims to be able to complete dozens in days or weeks. So this suggests that most, if not all, of these deals will be superficial. In the words of a former U.S. trade negotiator, more tentative or aspirational, with limited economic benefits rather than actual trade agreements, with terms of so-called deals left vague and unclear. So Trump's eagerness to claim success in any sort of negotiation gives an enormous advantage to skillful negotiators like Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un. The concern is that Trump may be prepared to settle for a deal, even a bad deal, which he will inevitably describe as the greatest ever deal. Kim will play on that to advance North Korean interests. South Korea and Japan are concerned that Trump will sell out their interests in order to make a deal. To paraphrase Charles de Gaulle, who reportedly asked President Kennedy if the U.S. would sacrifice New York to save Paris, Seoul and Tokyo asked if Trump would risk putting the U.S. mainland at risk to deter North Korean regional threats. South Korea is in a particularly vulnerable position. It would be at the front line of any hostile act by North Korea. And as a result of the impeachment process, there has been a leadership vacuum in South Korea. Also, as a high-tech state, it is particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks from North Korea. How might U.S. talks with Russia influence U.S.-North Korean talks beyond providing a possible template? Putin may or may not encourage Kim to undertake talks with Trump. One assumes he will not encourage such talks if the U.S.-Russia talks themselves end in an impasse. Putin may also provide advice to Kim on how to deal with Trump. Kim will also be closely monitoring U.S. concessions to Russia regarding Crimea and other Ukrainian territory, and Trump's general disregard of Ukraine's security interests, and be encouraged to seek not only recognition of North Korean nuclear status, but UN concessions regarding U.S. security guarantees to South Korea and Japan. Beyond this, will the U.S. seek withdrawal of North Korean soldiers in Russia and an end of North Korean weapons to Russia and termination of Russian assistance to North Korea and an adherence to sanctions? Will Russia seek reduction of sanctions against North Korea? The North Korean aspect of the U.S.-Russian talks will not be a deal breaker for either party, but may be an indication of future intent. So in the last couple of years, the Russian connection has overshadowed other North Korean activity, which continues to be focused on enhancing its missile and nuclear capability. While North Korea has not conducted a nuclear test since 2017, open sources indicate that it has at least 50 to 60 nuclear weapons with a capacity to produce 6 or 7 additional warheads per year. It continues to test and perfect a variety of missiles in a systematic way. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, most recently in October 2024, long-range strategic cruise missiles in which North Korea claims can be armed with nuclear warheads. It's done so most recently in February of 2025, in January, and last February as well. Intermediate range missiles, which tested in January of 2025, and short-range missiles, which it tested last fall. Just on Monday, this is last Monday, Kim Jong-un oversaw a range of missile launches from a warship, which had just been unveiled on the weekend. And according to North Korean media, the weapons included supersonic cruise missiles, strategic cruise missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, and test firing of a 127 millimeter shipboard automatic gun. So in March 2025, North Korea announced that it was building its first nuclear-powered strategic guided missile submarine. So two aspects to note regarding these various test launches. First, North Korea has yet to demonstrate the ability to attach a nuclear warhead to a missile. And the second is not yet believed to have developed the capability of having a nuclear warhead on an ICBM survive the heat and friction and not disintegrate on re-entry from space into the Earth's atmosphere. So I thought this was a good moment to ask, the question was asked about Russia, so we'll ask the question about North Korea. How does North Korea pay for all this? So people often wonder how North Korea, a state which is by most conventional standards impoverished with a limited GDP and even more limited trade, finance its missile and nuclear programs as well as other aspects of its formidable military-industrial complex. So before and after the pandemic, its trade had been overwhelmingly with China. While Russian payments in cash or kind for troops and equipment and armaments have injected important liquidity into the North Korean economy, China remains North Korea's dominant trading partner, accounting for some 90% of its overall trade. Incidentally, some have assumed that this trade dominance would translate into Chinese dominance on policy, but that has not proved to be the case, as North Korea has shown time and time again that they have made their own decisions for their own reasons on their own timelines, including decisions that annoy and irritate China. Case in point has been North Korea's nuclear missile tests, which have not pleased China, not least of all because North Korea's nuclear test site is near the Chinese border. Hence, China's votes in the Security Council condemning these tests and supporting sanctions. At the same time, China will only go so far in reining in North Korea as it fears a failed state and U.S. intervention more than a nuclear North Korea. So more recently, China has been cool to North Korea's growing alignment with Russia, an alignment which allows Russia to elbow into what China considers its zone of influence. And influence is a better way to describe China's relationship with North Korea. This is not a command and control relationship. Rather, China is a major influencer of North Korea. So that's one way they're getting funds, from trade with China and from the Russian connection. Beyond that, it also receives about $500 million annually from North Korean workers who still labor abroad, often in harsh and dangerous conditions, despite UN Security Council Resolution 2397 from December of 2017 banning their employment and requiring all member states to repatriate all North Korean workers by December 2019. So these indentured workers are mainly to be found in Russia and China, both of which voted for the Security Council Resolution 2397, but they're also in 40 other countries. And these workers work in factories, agriculture, construction, logging camps, and mining operations. Plus, there are workers in restaurants that North Korea operates abroad. But the most lucrative revenue source for North Korea is crypto crime, combined with more conventional crypto activity, in which North Korean tech experts sell their services to unsuspecting clients abroad. According to the UN, North Korea utilizes virtual asset hacking as a primary means of funding its military programs, such as development of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles, to evade international sanctions. Unlike ordinary cyber criminals who operate for personal gain, North Korea's hacking activities and operations are supported at the state level, with North Korean cyber units utilizing government resources and strategic objectives to carry out sophisticated large-scale attacks. The U.S. estimates that half of the cost of North Korea's missile program is covered by the proceeds from North Korea's crypto activity. So just a couple of months ago, in February of 2025, the North Korean Lazarus hacking group pulled off the biggest crypto virtual asset heist in history by hacking into the cryptocurrency exchange Bybit in Dubai and making off with US 1.46 billion, not million, billion, in Ethereum, which is a popular digital currency. Bybit oversees $20 billion worth of clients' deposits. Unfortunately, their security proved no match for the North Koreans. Though this was their largest heist, this is not an isolated incident for North Korea. In 2024, so this occurred just a couple months ago, but in 2024, the total amount of hacking damage in the virtual asset industry is $2.2 billion. Of this, approximately 61%, or $1.4 billion, was stolen by North Korea's Lazarus Group. And since 2014, North Korea operatives have targeted global virtual asset wallets using increasingly diverse and sophisticated methods. According to a leading crypto hacking expert, North Korea is regarded as the most sophisticated and persistent threat in the current virtual asset ecosystem. In 2016, it stole 101 million from the National Bank of Bangladesh and almost got away with a further 900 million before that particular episode was stopped. And since 2018, North Korea and the Lazarus Group have stolen and laundered more than 200 million in virtual assets annually. And prior to this Bybit 1.4 billion heist, their biggest one had been 615 million stolen in the so-called Ronin Bridge hacking incident in 2022, which was a banner year for North Korean hackers who stole more than 1 billion in cryptocurrency that year. So North Korea related hackers are highly skilled and sophisticated in all areas of hacking technology and laundering stolen funds. So after stealing virtual assets, they use complex money laundering techniques to conceal their origins. Now, the transparency of blockchain makes it possible to identify hacks and trace stolen funds. Unfortunately, tracking is one thing, recovering is another, and most of the assets stolen are unrecovered. So beyond cybercrime, North Korea has a huge cyber war capacity. According to open source South Korean intelligence, North Korea has ramped up its cyber operations, targeting the foreign policy and security infrastructures of major countries, including Canada, while seeking advanced defense technologies to bypass sanctions and support its nuclear program. So what is next for North Korea? So North Korea is having an unprecedented geostrategic moment. It has a well-funded, sophisticated, and advancing missile and nuclear program. It has strong allies in China and Russia, which will ensure there are no more Security Council resolutions and sanctions against it, and which will weaken enforcement of existing sanctions. North Korea is able to play the Russian-Chinese dynamic to seek advantages from both. North Korea is a mutually beneficial security alliance with Russia. Plus, it has Trump in the White House. So here are three scenarios for the future. 1, negotiations with the US. 2, continued impasse. 3, return to the fire and fury of Trump 1.0 circa 2017. So regarding scenario 1, negotiations with the US. In principle, negotiations leading to enhanced security on the Korean Peninsula and beyond would be positive if they were done right. However, the devil is in the detail, and Donald Trump hates detail. Ideally, as noted above, negotiations should encompass a range of issues beyond denuclearization. And beyond lifting and easing of sanctions and other incentives, for its part, North Korea will seek reduction or withdrawal of US troops from South Korea and a weakening of the US commitment to the defense of South Korea and Japan. North Korea will also seek recognition of its nuclear status. Also troubling to South Korea in particular are indications that the US may be looking to repurpose the regional security architecture to be more focused on China while increasing the onus on South Korea to deter North Korea. So this aligns with Trump's own focus on China and could involve reorienting the mission of US forces in South Korea towards China rather than North Korea. This could come into play, for example, if US forces in Korea were deployed to deal with a Chinese threat to Taiwan. The concern is that Trump, in his eagerness to make a deal, and without the restraints provided earlier by John Bolton and experienced advisors, he will settle for the quick fix, a media moment, the announcement, rather than the reality of success. So I'll just wrap up by saying that the second scenario was just an impasse, and that has the risk, as it always has, of inadvertent conflict. And the third scenario is a return to the fire and fury of 2017. So this would be the worst scenario, is a risk setting off a regional and global nuclear conflict. So the bottom line, negotiations are preferable, but no deal is better than a bad deal. And both a bad deal and a return to fire and fury need to be avoided. And if a bad deal or fire and fury are what is on offer, then best to wait until future occasions with a U.S. president with a better appreciation of the geostrategic issues at stake. And in the meantime, the international community needs to prepare de-escalation off-ramps in the event of escalation on the peninsula. Thank you.
Is there any evidence of active cooperation between Russia and North Korea on cyber crimes, crypto attacks, crypto heist?
So the North Koreans, when they first started on their crypto activity, used Russian criminal organizations to launder money, and so they did so, and the assumption was that that the Russian state knew about it and condoned it, wasn't directly involved, but it wouldn't be happening if they didn't condone it. At the same time, a lot of the North Korean operatives operated out of servers in China. So again, it indicates that without Chinese cooperation, this would not have occurred in the China front.
James, I wonder what you might be able to tell us about Canadian targets of North Korean computer hacking.
Well, there was a conference in Ottawa recently where the official involved on the Canadian side, on the Canadian government, official responsible for this, identified China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea as all being active in Canada. And I guess the difference between one of the differences between in North Korea is that the other ones pursue state objectives, as does North Korea, but North Korea is always looking for revenue as well. So that's one of the differences. But they are active.
Well, there's a ton of insight, as they say there, and I appreciate your being with us this afternoon and for everything that you've shared. It stretches our minds, I think, about that portion of the world, and indeed the relations amongst those countries. We thank you very, very much,
Thank
James.
you. It's a pleasure.
And I have this.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.